Okay, we're to the last presentation today. How's everyone feeling? Good, good. Okay, I see some tired faces, but I will keep it short today. I'm going to provide just a quick update about the Pollinator Habitat Scorecard. So, Kelsey, that was a great segue question. But we'll save most of the discussion about the Pollinator Habitat Scorecard for the breakout session tomorrow. So I will just give you a teaser. If you want to know more, join us tomorrow afternoon for that breakout session. So as probably many of you are aware, we've had this metrics and targets task force that has been around for about a year and a half, I think. And back in, I was looking at the dates, I think it was back 2017, we had a task force session at one of these working group meetings. We created an action plan, and in that action plan we said, for the right-of-way working group, we wanted to have a common definition of pollinator habitat, so we could all be talking about the same sort of thing. We wanted to have some sort of standard mechanism for scoring that habitat, particularly with rights-of-way in mind. So this idea of having a universal right-of-way habitat scorecard emerged. And then it was also important, as part of this action plan we developed, to have some system of training field teams to recognize what they're looking at when they're out conducting habitat assessments. So about a year ago, we wrestled around with a pollinator habitat definition. Many of you were part of that conversation, and we settled upon this definition in green. So pollinator habitat contains native flowering plants, host plants, and nesting sites throughout the growing season. We fully recognize that was a very simple definition and that some organizations would want to elaborate. And so all of the text below that green box are suggested additions to the definition. So that was kind of how we found a flexible kind of working definition that could work for the working group. So following that, we had our definition in hand. The next step was to tackle this universal scorecard. And we've had a lot of discussion about, what's really the objectives of the scorecard. As I said, that universal standard is important. We have a common language across the working group that we can talk about habitat, quantify it, qualify it, and also recognize the differences between different types of energy and transportation lands that we're all working on and managing. It was also really important that we have a very flexible tool. So we've developed this multi-tiered approach to help provide the right level of detail to fit the right application. So we've had several rounds thinking about the appropriate tiers. We fully recognize that there's a lot of existing habitat assessment tools out there. So we're trying to build as much alignment as we can, not to reinvent the wheel, and try to ensure that there's compatibility between those assessments. And then also, as Mark alluded to, the scorecard serves as kind of the basis for that geospatial habitat database. So having, again, common metrics that we're all kind of agreeing to report on will be really powerful and valuable information in that database. So our process has consisted of evaluating a lot of different scorecards and assessment tools that are out there. I think we have at least 18 that we have in our tracking spreadsheet that we've gone kind of attribute by attribute and looked at how different scorecards have handled different data points. We've kind of pulled what seemed to be the most common of those attributes. We've had a scorecard subgroup. Again, many of you have been involved with that subgroup, kind of wrestling with how and what are the best attributes to include. And last year, we proposed kind of our first draft of the scorecard. It was essentially a two-tier basic assessment plus kind of an added optional assessment tiered approach. We field tested it with a number of different organizations, had a lot of feedback, and basically decided there were some things we liked about the scorecard, but there are other things we didn't. And so at our last working group meeting in October, we decided to introduce this idea of a third tier. And so we're working towards really having a very basic tier 1 that would provide a very simple assessment. As a result, has a very simple outcome. The outcome of the score is essentially looks like you might have habitat or looks like you might not. Tier 2 would be kind of a mid-level assessment that might be able to give some kind of qualitative score. And then Tier 3 would be a more advanced assessment that would hopefully be able to give some sort of quantitative score. So I see a couple of photos. I'll let you guys take pictures. But if this intrigues you, again, I would encourage you to join us for the conversation tomorrow. At the last working group meeting, we also did some rapid fire assessments to get a general feel on the scoring methodology. So that's not yet well developed, but we're trying different approaches and trying to find some common ground on how to rank and score the different attributes. So that's an ongoing conversation. And so we're essentially to a point now where we have had a lot of discussions. I think we've made a lot of progress. But we just need to get this scorecard over the finish line. And so we are trying to develop a very concrete game plan to help us complete this scorecard and have it ready for use here in 2019. So we've developed a draft scope of work. The working session tomorrow will be basically diving into detail in that scope of work to help us understand, have we kind of framed out the rest of the project as we should. Basically includes 4 tasks, evaluating all the feedback we've received on the various versions of the scorecard to date, settling on a final design for the tiers, those 3 tiers that I had on the previous slide, finalizing that scoring methodology, and then lastly finalizing an easy, friendly-to-use scorecard design. And our very aggressive target would be to aim to have something by late spring, so in that April-May timeframe. I think it's definitely doable, given I think we've done a lot of the legwork to date, but we'll need to pull together some resources to get that done. There's a variety of additional tasks I think we could consider including as well, maybe like a web app or some additional QA, QC, or field testing that could be incorporated, but again, kind of future tasks beyond spring 2019. So how you can help. As I've mentioned, we have this breakout session tomorrow. It's the 2:15 to 3:30 slot. We will be tackling that scope of work in more detail. So we're looking for your input on the scope of work. We're also looking for funding to support the completion of the scorecard here in the next couple of months. And as I've mentioned now several times, we have that breakout session tomorrow. Any questions on the scorecard? Is that enough of a teaser? Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to a couple last announcements, and then we're going to move into our peer exchanges where you guys can talk more about everything you've heard today. I wanted to float I guess a half announcement, I'll call it. We are in discussions with the Trees and Utilities Conference, Utility Arborists Association, about potentially co-locating our fall meeting at their conference in Cincinnati in October. The details have not been firmed up, so it's just still kind of an idea that we're processing. It would be much, in many ways, kind of similar to co-locating our meeting with President's Fest this time around, although possibly integrating a little bit more of our sessions into their conference agenda. So welcome any feedback or thoughts you have on that. Again, we are in the cycle of meeting twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, and trying to find a way to kind of maximize our meetings with other meetings that you all are attending. So again, would welcome your input on if you think that's a good idea.